There's something about grief that most people don't talk about. We talk about the main loss, the obvious one, the one everyone can see, but we don't talk enough about everything that comes after, the changes, the ripple effects, the quiet shifts that happen in your life once everything is different. That's what secondary loss is. And if you've ever found yourself grieving things that feel smaller than the original loss, but still feels heavy, this episode is for you. Welcome to Highlight Your Healing. I'm Shannon Roan, grief coach, founder of Highlight Your Healing and J&J Journals. This podcast is for women navigating grief and learning to heal with faith. Secondary loss is a loss that follows the primary loss. It's everything that changes because something significant happened. When someone you love dies, the primary loss is that person. When there's a diagnosis, the primary loss might be your health or the life you expected. When a relationship ends, the primary loss is that relationship. But grief doesn't stop there. Secondary loss is what unfolds afterwards. It's the loss of routines. It can be the loss of normalcy, the loss of the way life used to feel, the loss of who you were before everything changed. And sometimes those secondary losses are the ones that linger the longest because they show up in everyday life. They show up in quiet moments. They show up when you try to move forward and realize something else feels different. Let's say someone loses a spouse. The primary loss is a spouse, but the secondary losses might include the loss of shared routines, the loss of financial stability, the loss of companionship, the loss of how holidays used to feel, the loss of the future you thought you would grow old together. Or think about a medical diagnosis. The primary loss may be your health as you knew it. But the secondary losses can include the loss of independence, the loss of you feeling carefree in your body, the loss of spontaneity, being able to just go and do whatever it is that you wanted to do, the loss of plans that now feel uncertain. And when we don't name these secondary losses, we often end up confused about why we still feel heavy. So you might find yourself thinking, why am I still struggling? Why does this still feel hard? Shouldn't I be further along by now? But you haven't just lost one thing. You've lost multiple things. Grief doesn't only respond to the main event. It responds to everything that changed because of it. And one of those reasons secondary losses can feel so heavy is because it often shows up when you're trying your best to move forward. You might be having a normal day. You're getting through your routine, you're handling what needs to be handled, and then something small happens that reminds you of how different life can feel now. It could be a holiday that doesn't feel the same. It could be seeing someone else living a life that you once imagined for yourself. It could be a conversation where you realize people don't fully understand what you carry. And suddenly, there's a wave of emotion that feels out of place for the moment. That's often secondary loss showing up. Secondary loss doesn't always come as this big emotional breakdown. Sometimes it can show up as frustration or as exhaustion. Sometimes it shows up as a quiet sadness that you can't fully explain. You may notice, you've had less patience for things that once felt manageable. You may even notice that you get overwhelmed more quickly or that you notice certain environments start feeling heavier than they used to. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you're becoming a negative person. When life shifts in a significant way, your perspective also shifts. You become more aware of what feels meaningful and what feels draining. You become more aware of how much energy it takes to simply move throughout the day. And when that awareness increases, you start seeing just how much has changed. Secondary loss can show up in your relationships. Maybe friendships have changed because you no longer relate the same. Maybe your marriage has changed under pressure. Or maybe certain people stopped showing up the way that you needed them to show up. Those are losses too. You might find yourself in conversations where you feel different. You might notice that certain people, they just don't fully understand your experience. And you might feel like you've outgrown certain dynamics and that can feel lonely. And you might think to yourself, they don't really get it. I don't know how to explain this. I feel different when I'm around them now. That's secondary loss. You're not just grieving what happened, you're grieving how your world feels different within that relationship. And secondary loss can also show up in your identity. So you may feel like you're not the same person that you used to be. You may notice that your priorities have changed. You may feel less connected to the version of yourself who existed before everything happened. And sometimes you miss who you were before you carried the story. Maybe you were more carefree. Maybe you felt more certain about your future. Maybe you moved through life just a little bit different. Missing that version of yourself doesn't mean that you want to go backwards. It simply means that you recognize what has changed. And recognizing that change is a part of processing secondary loss. See, another layer of secondary loss is a loss of expectations, the future you pictured, the timeline you assumed, the life you thought you would be living by now. And when that picture changes, there's grief attached to that. Even if you're rebuilding or moving forward, even if good things still exist, you can still grieve what you thought would be. Grief is layered. And every time life presents you with a reminder of what changed, another layer can surface. You may find yourself grieving a loss of predictability, the loss of certainty, the loss of the assumption that life would work out the way you planned it. And that awareness can feel heavy at times, but it's also a part of adjusting to reality in a new way. One of the hardest parts about secondary loss is that it's often not recognized by other people. People may assume that because time has passed, that you're okay. They may even think that you're already grieved what needed to be grieved. They may not realize how many things have changed after the original loss. So when secondary grief shows up, you might feel alone. You might feel like you're overreacting. You might try to minimize what you're feeling by telling yourself it's not that serious. But if it affects you, it matters. Naming secondary loss helps you understand why certain moments can still feel emotional, why certain seasons feel heavier than others, or why certain reminders catch you off guard. So what do you do with a secondary loss? First, you're going to acknowledge it. When something feels different and that difference hurts, allow yourself to recognize it. You don't have to explain it to everyone else. You don't have to justify it. Just acknowledge it for yourself. Second, give yourself patience. Adjustment takes time. Rebuilding takes time. Getting used to a new normal takes time. If you are learning how to live within a life that changed, that doesn't happen overnight. And then third, make gentle adjustments. Sometimes secondary loss requires creating new routines, maybe new traditions, or new ways of just moving through that season that feels different now. Adjustment doesn't mean forgetting what was. It means building around what has changed. And here's something important that I want you to remember. Secondary loss can exist alongside moments of joy. You can create new memories and still miss the old ones. You can feel gratitude and still feel sadness. You can move forward and still carry what you've lost. Those experiences can exist together. If you've been feeling waves of emotion that don't seem to match your current circumstances, consider whether secondary loss is present. Is there something that changed that you haven't fully acknowledged yet? Is there a version of your life that you're still quietly missing? Is there a part of yourself you're still adjusting to? See, grief doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it shows up in quiet ways. And when you start naming secondary loss, you begin to understand yourself better. You realize that you're not stuck. You're not overly sensitive. You're not doing grief wrong. You're simply processing the many layers of grief. I want to close by speaking directly to the woman who feels like she should be past this by now. If certain seasons still feel heavy, if certain reminders still catch you off guard, if you still find yourself missing things that you can't fully explain, give yourself patience. Give yourself room to acknowledge what changed. Give yourself permission to move forward honestly. If this episode spoke to you, subscribe to the podcast and share it with another woman who may need this space. And until next time, keep highlighting your healing.